All right, guys, so what we're gonna do now is switch over all the components from the stock supercharger over to the supercharger that Joker's Performance is modified for us. So what we have here is just a bare Red Eye or Demon supercharger case. Okay, there's no internals in it except for the rotor pack. And the items that I want to show specifically are right here. This is the bearing plate, they call it. Okay, this is behind the front drive, which is right here, mounts on like that. So they have CNC'd out this for better flow. And this is the real piece right here where all the performance comes into play. And I'm going to take this one apart here in a second and show you side-by-side comparisons. But you can see the amount of work that's been done in here, the port work. This front drive, if the shaft has been taken out, weighs about 8 pounds. Okay, this is made out of aluminum. Once they get done CNCing out all the material, it drops about a full pound out. Okay, so they take a significant amount out. So I know this doesn't look like much right now, but once I show you the stock when compared to it, you're really going to be able to see the difference. So we're going to start with taking this one apart. I'm just going to spin this around so they're orientated the same way, and I want to show you something on the back right here. None of the Hellcat based platforms have a boost reference, and what I mean by that is an area where you can tap into to monitor vacuum or boost. So what we do here is very, very simple. On the back of the case, we drill this out and tap this for 1/8 inch NPT. On the opposite side right here, you can see where one of the map sensors has a hole drilled in here and is referencing boost as well. So we just picked a stock location on the other side and go in the same spot. And we've gone in through a barb, and we just run a piece of silicone hose out to the side here. And I'll show you later on what we do with this. But this is just basically we're going to reference boost, and specifically this is for the booster pump unit. But you could also tee this into a vacuum manifold and get a boost reference for anything else that you wanted. Okay, so here's the stock supercharger, and as a complete unit, the only thing missing are the bolts that mount the supercharger to the cylinder heads themselves. So we're going to take all these bolts out here, and this is a T30 Torx head. So just going to run these out. And keep in mind, there is a specific torque pattern when you tighten this down, as well as the supercharger. So the top bolts right here, I'll show you. They're all the same length. They're significantly longer than the rest of them. So all the other bolts are the same length. So it's easy not to get them mixed up. Okay, once all the bolts are out, you have to pry this lid off, but you have to be very careful. There's a paper gasket underneath here that I'll show you. And if you just take your time and pry it up very easily, you can usually not tear that gasket up. Okay, so this right here is the gasket I was talking about, so we'll have to be very careful to pry this up without damaging it. So I'll get a tool here in a second. We'll just see if we can walk around it. So if you compare these two, you can see right here these two bricks. These right here are basically where this is the bypass valve, and this is actually just a throttle body off a 4-cylinder Dodge vehicle. This is what diverts, either builds boost or just lets it bypass like at idle or part throttle. So when the car creates boost, what it does is that valve closes and the air comes up through here and inside the lid, and then it forces it down through these two intercooler bricks right here. These actually have coolant going through them through these hoses, and that actually cools the intake charge before it goes into the cylinder heads. So what we'll do, we'll take this apart. And generally you can take this supercharger apart without damaging these gaskets. If you do damage them, you'll have to get an entire supercharger gasket kit from the dealership. It's pretty expensive, so you want to try to be real careful. So this right here is just basically the seal that goes on this top of this front drive, and this rubber portion seals around this throttle body. As I mentioned before, the gaskets, obviously this thing, you can't buy the individual gaskets. You have to get it in a complete gasket kit from Dodge. It's very expensive. So if you're very careful when you take this apart, you can reuse the gaskets with no problem at all. So that being said, there are 6 little green silicone gaskets right here. Sometimes they get stuck down in here, so just be careful, be mindful of them, look for them, put them back in their spots. They just slip fit right in here, okay? 3 more gaskets that, actually not gaskets, O-rings. They're very hard to see. In these top 3 holes right here, there's a small black O-ring in the recess of each one. So if you take a screwdriver and very carefully pry them out, just like that, in each hole, you can just put them in here for later and we'll reuse those. This paper gasket right here, okay? If you're very careful lifting the lid off, you can not tear this up. So what you want to do now is just kind of go around the perimeter and see if any of the spots are loose already. And so right here, you can see it's kind of lifted up. So if you just get some sort of tool, this is just like a trim tool, but you can use anything that's kind of flat and plastic, and just kind of walk around and just barely pry up on it. You don't want to force it. As you can see, if you're just careful with it, it comes right up. And obviously this car is very low mileage, so if you've got a car with more miles on it, it might just be a better idea just to replace all the gaskets on it. But if you're doing this to a fairly new car, this works perfectly fine. And there you go, you can see it's off, no problem at all. We'll just kind of sit it right here just for the time being so it doesn't get tore up. We talked a little bit about the boosted air coming up through here, filling the area underneath the lid, and then being forced down in through these cooling bricks right here. The coolant circulates through the bricks, through this aluminum passage right here, through these 2 holes. And this is the reservoir that sits on the passenger side strut tower that holds the coolant for the supercharger system. This does not mix with the coolant for the rest of the engine. It's totally separate. So what we're gonna do is take these bricks out, and it's real easy. You just have these 6 bolts right here, these little retainer pieces. They'll hold the bricks in place. So these are a different size Torx head than everything else. So just keep that in mind. And while you have this off, this is also a good time to kind of look at the rotor blades in here. And you can just kind of spin them around by hand. Be careful not to pinch your fingers. And you can see if there's any accelerated wear on them. They have a black coating on there. And once the rotors have excessive wear, or if the rotor pack is out of alignment, you'll see the coating actually coming off here. But you can see on these, it's perfectly fine, as well as these. So these right here just kind of pop up, and they have some gaskets, just kind of made onto the bottom of them. You can see, if you're just careful with them, they'll lift right off. This is the passageway for the coolant to go from one brick to the other, and then obviously go to the heat exchanger in the reservoir. This right here is a coolant temperature sensor specifically for the coolant for the supercharger system. So we don't need to take any of this apart. Usually it's easier just to leave these hoses connected when you pull the supercharger. You don't have to, but that's the way we did it on this one. So what I'll do is I'll take this off, and it's just 4 Torx head screws that hold this on. I'm just going to put these in here, just keep them separated. And if you have just any sort of a rubber mallet or anything like that, it's real easy just to knock this loose. You don't have to hit it very hard at all, just kind of walk it off. I'll show y'all what holds this on. Okay, so what you have here are 2 very small O-rings that sit down in these grooves right here, okay? And actually, here's the groove right here. It's just stuck on here. So they came off like this. So you just want to pull them off very carefully without tearing them up. And then don't pry them to the point where you stretch them out, because then they're not going to fit very well. And then you can see right here, these machine surfaces, they slip fit over here, and these O-rings seal that. So once you get this off here, you can just kind of leave it here for the time being. And here's one of the bricks, and here's the other. They're both the same thing. They're both the same size and everything, so there's not a right or a left. So what you do to get these out is just get some sort of tool. I just have this laying around, so you can use anything. You can be a screwdriver. You just want to be careful. Just start walking it up. And it's going to fit pretty snug just for the fact that these silicone seals are at both ends. And so you can see right here, it's not going to come up. So what we're gonna have to do is pick the front up and walk it out the front. And some coolant's gonna come out, it's not a big deal. So here's what you have. So this is what it looks like. So what happens is coolant goes through one port and out the other, and it goes through these fins, and then the air passes through this way. So that was the hot compressed air, as it passes through here, the coolant runs through here and cools the intake charge. So when it comes out the bottom and into the cylinder heads, that cools the intake charge. So that's exactly how this works. So I'm just going to set this one over here, and it's orientated the same way, so we'll put that right in here. Same thing with the O-rings. I'll just kind of set them right here. And then the other side comes out the exact same way. So if you do happen to tear any of these gaskets up, anything like these silicone end seals, these O-rings right here that are blue, this all comes in the Supercharger gasket kit. But like I said, it is very expensive. And unless you have a high mileage car, none of these are really wore out. So now when you look inside here, it looks exactly the same as in here, okay? You can see that on the stock Supercharger, there's nothing right here. And then we have the boost reference that we've drilled in this one, okay? Right here, you can see what we don't have here, we have here, and that is a map sensor. So on all the Hellcat based stuff, they utilize 4 map sensors, okay? The Hellcat uses a different map sensor, the early ones, than the Demon or Red Eye. They use a different map sensor, one for more boost. And they're all the same part number. So I keep them separated from where they are at. You know, you can do as you want to there. So what I am gonna do is I'm gonna rinse this one off because this is in this intake port and it did get a little bit of coolant on it. So I'm just gonna rinse it off just to be careful. Okay guys, so before we put these in, I just go across the silicone gasket, just wipe them off, and then I put a little bit of grease. I use like the clear synthetic grease on the O-rings. And then right here in the O-ring grooves, I've filled those up with a little bit of synthetic grease. I'll show you why here in just a second. So we'll just coat these. Okay, so a cleanest map sensor and all the Hellcat stuff, they use 4 map sensors. They're all the same, but I'll show you the different locations. And what they do is they help the artificial neural network monitor intake air temperatures at different locations, throttle pressure, and boost. So here's the coolers. We're gonna drop those in exactly like they came out of the first one. We're gonna put the front end in, or actually the rear end in down. Just kind of walk it in. And just put them down into place just like so. And they might have a little bit of coolant left in them. It's not going to hurt anything. Just, you know, maybe keep some rags handy, just like right there. And if it leaks some, just put a rag underneath it. We've already drained most of it out. Once you get them leveled back out, it'll stop. Okay, so the bricks are back in. So we've got these little bitty flimsy O-rings that happen to come off with stuck on there. So the reason I put grease in them is because you can easily come down in here and put them back in the grooves, and the grease does a really good job of holding them in place, and that way you don't have to worry about when you're putting them back together, one coming out, getting pinched and tore up, and then you got a leak that you might not know about till you get the Supercharger all the way back installed, and then you have to take it back off just to, you know, fix it, which obviously we don't want to do. And this little grease trick works not just here. This is something I've been using for years, you know, to keep O-rings and gaskets in place. So as you can see, those are staying in place exactly where we want them, no problem. These O-rings are greased, so this will slip back in real easily. So there's really no prep work that needs to be done on this reservoir. It's pretty much ready to go back on. So what we'll do is we'll just slip this back into place. And obviously the O-rings are just gonna go back into here. They've got grease on them to keep them going, and the O-rings will, you know, seal against these flat pieces. There we go. I'm gonna just run these in with this impact because it makes it a little bit faster. I'm not gonna do the final torque with that. I'll do that by hand. But And I like to do a crisscross pattern all the time. I don't want to torque this all the way down and leave this one loose. So I'll just kind of go across. And as far as these go, I don't know. I don't think there's a specific torque. I just do them by hand. Okay, that feels good right there. So you can see not much to it. Just a few bolts and a few, being careful with a few different seals. And the whole back looks all assembled already. Be careful with these Torx bit. You got to make sure the socket's fully engaged or else you'll strip the bolt out. And then we have this one map sensor in the back. I've already cleaned the coolant out of it. So we're just going to, you can put some grease on this O-ring, but they really go in very easy. It's not real need to. Again, I like to get it started by hand so you don't make sure you cross-thread anything in the aluminum. And it's just a small bolt, so I'll just run it in by hand. We've got this all tightened back up. We've got the bricks in, we've got the map sensor in. I just repositioned these hose clamps. Reason being, the firewall of the car would be back here, so this would be very tight to get to. If you got like a special tool, like the spring clamp tool and a cable, you can get to these. If not, it's just easier just to pull it off like this, and then you don't even have to deal with these. So we took these off earlier, okay? And these just hold these bricks down in place. So we can go ahead while we're here and just go ahead and reposition these and put these both back in. And I'll just obviously keep them separated side by side. I'm not even sure if they're different. They are different, okay? So, and these just kind of overhang, obviously, between the supercharger, the casing, and the brick itself, just to retain it down in there. Okay. And again, same thing. I'm just going to run these down most of the way with a drill or an impact. As you can see, I'm not going very tight at all. I'm just kind of snugging them down. I'll do it by hand. Okay, so I just switched back over to this side just to give you all a better view. I'm just going to run these same bolts in by hand. Again, there's no real torque spec that I know of. It's just, if you've been doing this for a while, it's pretty easy to just tell by hand. And I start with the middle bolt on these. If you look at them, they're not perfectly flat. They kind of like arch up like this. So I torque the middle down and then go to the two ends. And then one other thing while I'm back here, I'll show y'all. This right here is the bleeder. This is actually how you bleed the coolant system for the supercharger. You just crack this. I think it's 1/4 inch or 8 millimeter. And since this is the highest point of the cooling system for the supercharger, this allows the air to, to rise to the very top, lets you bleed it out, you shut it, and it's a very fast, effective way to bleed all the air out of the supercharger system itself and know with confidence that you do have all the air pockets out. So the only other thing, I mentioned these little O-rings that I took out. And you can see here that I've already put some of that clear grease for the same exact reason. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put these O-rings back, and I'm going to use that grease to hold them in place. That way I ensure that they don't slip, fall out, get lost, anything like that. There we go. Now, one thing I'm not going to do is I'm just going to leave this off till the last minute because this is a paper gasket, so it's fairly flimsy, and I do not want it to get tore up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin these around so the camera has a better angle so you all can really see the front portion, which involves actually changing this out. And this is the part that I want to show you all in detail about. So we'll just spin these around. We've already got everything switched over. We know the lid, that's pretty cut and dry. So what we've got is the front drive, and we see the same spot in the back as we did the other side. That's for another map sensor, which is right here. So pretty cut and dry. Now, to get this front drive off, it's not hard, but there's going to be 6 bolts, okay? you know, a couple of these are going to be a little bit hard to access. So the first thing you want to do is take this, which is the third map sensor, out. As you can see, there are a couple specialty tools to get these out, but it's very, very tight. So, you know, most people aren't going to have a tool in their toolbox to get this out. But what you can do is use a regular socket and a 1/4 inch wrench, which fits on this little bit piece perfect. And you can kind of stick the socket in there and put the wrench like that, or with the open end, and you can, you know, unscrew this bolt and to where it's loose enough where you can actually get it out of there. And I have one of these personally at the shop, but they didn't have one here, so no problem. We just use this method and walk it right out. And you can see it comes out. You just slip this out of here, looks exactly like the same. We don't need to wash this out because obviously there's no coolant that got on it, so we'll just set this aside. And we'll put that in the new front drive. So with that out of the way, we'll deal with this one in a second. We've got 6 bolts here, 3 on the top, 3 on the bottom. They're 13 millimeter. So some of these are straightforward and some are a little hard to get to. I've broken these loose. This one right here in particular is a little hard to get to, but you can break it loose with a wrench. It's not a big deal. So once you get them loose, just take the impact and we'll run them out. Usually with a wobble socket's what I normally use, but they don't have one here. So, you know, this works fine. Again, all these bolts are the same size as well, the top and bottom, so you don't have to really worry about keeping them separated. I'll just fish these out of here. Okay, now, some of the early Hellcats had our actual paper gasket on here. Okay, now the newer ones usually use an anaerobic sealer, which is like a red material. So what you want to do, just get a rubber mallet or whatever you can and just start tapping this, and you'll see it barely start to separate. You don't have to hit it hard, just obviously don't hit it with a regular hammer. You'll mess it up. As soon as you get it separated, you start to feel it wiggle. You just separate it very easily, okay? So we'll set this aside. Put it over here for now. Okay, so now that we have this off, what I want to show you all is the 2 bearing caps side by side. So I don't know if y'all can get that. So here's what the stock one looks like, okay? And this is the CNC ported bearing plate that Joker's Performance has done. As you can see, specifically areas like this, where this is just a flat surface with a freeze plug, what they've got is an aluminum cap here to kind of get the airflow to flow into the supercharger much more efficiently. And then they've taken some material out of here to increase flow. So that's one part of the modification. The inside of the snout's the other, and I'll show you all that. So while we have this loose, we're just going to take this map sensor and transfer it over to here. Okay, we're just going to transfer it over. Okay guys, so we're going to pick up where we left off on this blower assembly. One thing that I want to show, get really close attention on, is this piece right here. This is called the bearing plate. Okay, this houses the front bearings for the rotor packs. So this is the stock blower. And you can see in here, let's pay close attention to this area right here. This one over here is the one from Joker's Performance. And you can see what they've done right here is remove this freeze plug type deal and then made a billet cap that presses in there in its place that streamlines the airflow into the supercharger. They've also taken some material out of here. You can tell it's been CNC ported to improve the airflow into the rotor pack. So this is a really good modification. This is something that they do. You can kind of just see where instead of the air coming in hitting this flat surface like this causing turbulence, this nice smooth transition really keeps the velocity high through the blower. So once we pull the front drives off, you'll see these plastic inserts in here. And you want to make close attention that they're all in there because they engage with these slots right here. So sometimes they can come loose. You just want to make sure you push them back in. And as you can see, obviously they're all in. The next thing I want to show you before we put it on is the difference in the front drives themselves. And this is really the main thing that causes the power to be different. So I'm going to show you all. This is a stock front drive, okay? This is where the throttle body goes. And I've got the gasket in here so you have a reference to see how much aluminum is on the inside of the O-ring. Okay, and then what the inside of that looks like. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push this back. I'm going to try to give you all a side-by-side comparison of a stock one versus the front drive from Joker's. And you can see that there's a significant amount of material removed from here. It's all CNC ported. On this front drive, if you disassemble it and take this shaft out of here, this is aluminum. It weighs about 8 pounds. And when he gets done CNC porting this, it takes off about a full pound of material. Okay, so it's a lot. On the front, you can see comparison-wise that now we have to seal it with RTV because there's enough material taken out of there where basically it's, you know, the O-ring wouldn't even work. It's all the way to the O-ring bevel. So this is the front drive. So we're going to install this on the Supercharger. This isn't real hard. It's pretty easy. But one thing that you want to do is make sure that you use anaerobic sealer. Okay, this is by Permatex. It's like a thick red paste. Okay, and this is really good for any type of like very highly machined aluminum surfaces. What you don't want to use is like RTV, Right stuff like that. Mainly because when you push this together, you're going to get some that squirts through and could possibly get stuck inside the blower. And also, if you ever have to get this back off to service it, RTV is incredibly hard to separate. You saw how I had to use the rubber mallet to kind of hit this several times to get it off. Okay, RTV would be significantly harder than that. So you want to use this, and you don't have to use a whole lot of this. Okay, a little goes a long way. So we're just going to take this anaerobic sealer and apply a very thin coat through here. If you look on this Supercharger, this is what this had on it, and literally the amount needed to seal this is so thin it almost looks just like a piece of film. Okay, so you don't have to gob this on. There's no reason for that. So this is kind of thick, so I just kind of hit the bigger spots with it, and then we can just spread it around. And this stuff will not seal up until it's basically absent of air, meaning when this is fully tightened up, that's when this will start setting up. So you've got plenty of time to work with this. There's no sense in getting in a rush or hurrying. The package says maybe irritable to the skin. I've been using this stuff for 25 years and have never had it irritate my skin, but you might want to use gloves. We're just going to spread an uneven, thin film just like this. If you get a little bit on the inside, it's not a big deal. Okay. That looks pretty good right there. If you see any spot at all that looks a little bit like you need some more, just kind of pick a spot and a little bit. But this looks pretty good. Like I said, this is only used on very precisely machined surfaces with very tight tolerances. You know, so if you had an area that wasn't perfectly machined like this would not be a good sealer to use. But in this case, it's perfect. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. And then one other thing, not that, I don't think it's a big deal, I've never had them come out, but you can be mindful that there are 2 dowel pins, okay? One is right here and one is right here. I've never seen them come out, but just like taking cylinder heads off an engine, same thing. Make sure one of the dowel pins didn't get stuck in the snout, especially since we're transferring one to the other like this, which this is fine. I just figured I'd make it a point. And what you're gonna do, just kind of line that up, and you're gonna turn this so these engage in these holes. And there's no specific orientation, so this can be anywhere that they line up, so it doesn't matter there. I'm just gonna get it close, and then we can just draw it in with the bolts. Again, all these bolts are equal length. There's no type of thread sealer or thread lock or anything like that. They just go in there. And I'm just tightening these up just barely where they're snug, and I'm gonna walk it around closely and draw this on real evenly, okay? So it's not. And notice I have this gun turned down very low, and I'm taking my time, I'm going crisscrossing, so this gets torqued down very evenly. You know, don't get in a rush and tighten one side. You'll get those alignment pins and everything in a bind. So you just wanna take your time and pull it in all the way. And then I will take a regular ratchet and just feel these by hand, see what they feel like, and then eventually we'll torque these with a torque wrench. I've snugged all these up, okay, and there is a specific tightening sequence I mentioned. Make sure you go around evenly and draw this in, but if you want the actual torque spec from Dodge, it's the bottom middle bolt, the top middle bolt, this one, this one, this one, and then this one. So I didn't follow that exact torque specs. As long as you use some common sense here, you don't need the exact torque specs. But as far as torquing the bolts, Dodge says to use a 3-pass pattern, which means you go to like 4 foot-pounds, 11 foot-pounds, and then 22 foot-pounds. I just kind of replicated that just by hand. I just barely draw it in. That's the most important part. They just don't want you going full torque on a bolt and then with the others loose, okay? But on the final torquing, I actually do use a torque wrench. This is a snap-on one. You can use whatever one you want. The main thing is just to make sure that the torque wrench you're using is accurate. Now we have this, I took this off on the other side last time. This is nothing really. This is just basically what seals where the bypass valve goes. And I'll flip the lid over, I'll show you. These holes are offset, so you can't really mess this up. You spin it around on here, it literally only goes on one way. And there's no sealer. This has an O-ring made into it. You just need to make sure it's on there. And same thing, 3 bolts, no Loctite. All same bolts, can't mix them up. And there's not a specific torque pattern or anything like this, but as you can see, I pretty much make it a habit to go around and very slowly and evenly tighten almost anything that I do, whether it be a throttle body or anything. Because there's some cars, you know, like that you can't get a shop manual on or you can't get the information, so you have to kind of rely on common sense when you're doing this. And then just feel the bolt, you know, pay close attention to it. You'll notice me using like an impact or something like that to take bolts out or to just kind of run them in to snug. That's just to make it more efficient, but you'll rarely see me do a final, actually you'll never see me final torque a bolt with like an impact. You know, I just want to feel it by hand, make sure that it's what I want it to be. And then we've got this gasket we talked about earlier. I'm just going to lay this on here. You see, and it only goes on one way, so you can just flip it around until it fits. And there we go. And there's no special sealer with this. And obviously, if this gasket is compromised at all when you take it off, you have to replace it. Okay, so don't try to not get the gasket, put sealer or anything stupid like that. You know, if the gasket looks perfect, you can reuse it, and this one does. So before we're ready to put the lid back on, we have to do one more thing. We have to install this last map sensor right here. And this is that one that can be hard to get to. So you'll slide right in. And then you got a very short bolt right here. So this one, it helps if you can run this in as far as you can by hand, just because the clearance you have right here is not very much. Okay, so I have a special socket for this. Most of y'all are not. They don't have one here. So again, we're just going to take this T30 Torx and this 1/4-inch wrench, and we're just going to hold it, and we're going to use this as a little trick y'all can use if you don't have this special socket. And honestly, this works just fine. And it's a short bolt, so even though these are little bitty turns, it still doesn't take that much time. You can sneak this out of here with the lid already on, just so in case, you know, you put it on, you're like, oh shit, yeah, I forgot it. It's no big deal. It's just a little bit harder, but we change these map sensors out sometimes, you know, and we don't have to take the lid off to do it. Okay, there you go. It's a little hack. All these bits are 1/4-inch wrench. It'll fit up on there, or the open end will go on there. So cool trick. So now, we got our map sensor on, so we have this one up here, the one in the back on the opposite side. We have this one, and then we have the 4th one that's in the lid of the supercharger. So we're just going to, let's see. I'm just going to put a little bit of grease right here. You don't have to do this, but it just makes it slide down in there a little bit easier. Use this very sparingly. You don't need much. Or actually, you don't need any at all if you don't want to. So now, we're ready to put the supercharger lid back on. So this is pretty easy. The bypass valve, again, this is just a throttle body off a 4-cylinder Dodge vehicle that they repurposed for a bypass valve, which is actually a great idea. There's nothing special inside here. I just make sure that the green gaskets are in here. And then all that I do is just take a little bit of brake cleaner or rubbing alcohol, whatever you have, and just kind of clean the surface before I put it on there. Nothing crazy. And so this portion is going to go down in that black rubber piece that we just bolted on. So that's a good way to line it up. There you go. And you just get it close, and then you got plenty of bolts to draw it in real evenly. And remember, we've got the 5 long bolts up top, and then all the rest of these are all the same length. So before you get anything tight, you know, your gasket's in there, so you want to make sure to get all these bolts started. And what that's going to do is that's going to help align the gasket all up, and you can look through the holes and make sure it's perfectly aligned or anything like that. And obviously make sure you don't drop these down in the bigger holes. Those are obviously the long bolts. There's 5 on each side that actually bolt the supercharger to the cylinder heads themselves. So it's very easy to see the difference, but. Okay, so I'm just gonna go through each one and just get them started in the holes. Not gonna do any tightening right now. This is just going to make sure that the lid is perfectly in alignment and all the bolts are started by hand so you don't cross thread anything, because this blower case is just aluminum, so it would be not very hard to cross thread something in it. Okay, those are all started, so I'm gonna start these. So we have the lid on, all the bolts are started, we know it's perfectly in alignment. So what we're gonna do now is start the tightening sequence, okay? There is actually a specific tightening pattern for this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you all. I just kind of drew it out. So you can screenshot this if you want to. I just kind of numbered it. Since there's so many bolts on this thing, I'm gonna go ahead and follow the procedure exactly. And these are tightened to 7 foot-pounds, which is not very much. So make sure you do not over tighten this. Again, I make several passes on this, so I go very light and just kind of take my time and go through them. So you'll see from this pattern that you're actually gonna start with the 5 bolts that are in the middle of the supercharger and then start going around. So I'm gonna use this, but very carefully. I've done this for a lot of years, so I'm gonna be very careful to just barely tighten these down. But if you're not sure, haven't done it a lot, just do it by hand. And as you can see, if you don't have this, it's not that big of a deal. We're just basically doing a crisscross pattern. You know, same as we talked about earlier. So this isn't crucial. The entire supercharger's together now. There's just two things left. Number one, if you're gonna use a ported throttle body and it's taken out this much, you're not gonna be able to use the gasket that the throttle body originally seals with, as you can see in right here. So what you're gonna have to use is a Permatex gasket maker. This is Right Stuff. We usually use gray or black, and you'll just make a thin bead before you mount your throttle body on here. And then the last piece, obviously, the pulley is missing. This pulley was provided by Grip Tech. They're an awesome company. They have a really unique coating here where the belt rides, where it basically eliminates any and all belt slip. So to install this, you're just gonna screw this onto the hub, and it takes a 20mm 12-point socket that goes on there. And you're gonna wanna make sure that you put blue Loctite on the threads, and then it gets torqued to, I think, 34 foot-pounds. Now, obviously, since there's not an effective way to hold this off the car once we install it, I'll show y'all where we put the belt on, how we can torque this real easily.